If there's something I love almost as much as I love whiskey, it has to be food, which makes sense why I am incredibly passionate about food pairing with whiskey. I absolutely love that you can take a food, you can take a whiskey, you can eat or drink them together, and what you end up with is greater than the sum of its parts. You're enhancing the taste of the whiskey, you're enhancing the taste of the food. What could go wrong? I also love that pairing food with whiskey adds a whole new dimension. It allows you to explore the flavours in your whiskey more. It just adds something new to do, a new way to try your whiskies. And I want to talk about a few ways that you can successfully pair your whiskies with food at home. Something else I love about food pairing with whiskey is that when you are tasting a whiskey and you're pairing it with a complementary food, you are often accentuating that flavour in the whiskey, which means it can be easier to be able to pick out notes from the whiskey because you've got that complementary food there. So this is a really great way if you're kind of struggling to be able to pick out flavour notes in whiskey. Try pairing it with a food that has a flavour in the whiskey, because you might actually find it easier to then be able to pick out that note, which will help you develop your palate, and practice makes perfect, and it will help you get there. I also love this as something you can do with your friends, because not everybody loves whiskey, but everybody loves food. So if you want to incorporate something with whiskey and be able to do it socially, this could be a great option. I'm going to give you 3 easy steps that will allow you to successfully pair any whiskey you like with some really great food options. Now, this first step is going to sound pretty simple, but actually it's pretty essential in making sure that you're going to pair the right foods that will go very well with your whiskey. And that is, we're going to decipher what the flavour profiles of the whiskey are that we are trying to taste. So I want you to think about things like the cask type. Was it matured in sherry casks? Was it matured in bourbon casks? Was it matured in rum casks, etc., etc.? Think about what those casks are and what that might mean in terms of the flavours in the whiskey. If you're trying something matured in a sherry cask, it's probably going to have some dried fruit notes, maybe some caramel, maybe some spice on the finish, maybe some cinnamon. Something in a bourbon cask might be a bit more vanilla heavy, etc., etc. I also want you to think about the origin of the whiskey. Is it something that was created next to the sea? Perhaps it's salty. Think about the origin of the whiskey and what that might mean in terms of its flavour. Decipher if it's smoky. Does it have some peaty notes? Or is it very sweet and mellow? Think about what the finish is. Is it spicy? Does it linger? Is it something that coats your mouth? Is it fruity? Is it a more savoury whiskey? Is it particularly light? Is it particularly dense? It is really important to also think about the texture of your whiskey. If it's very full-bodied, if it's very meaty, or if it just kind of sits on your palate while you're drinking it and then swiftly disappears. If you're struggling with this though, don't be shy to read the bottle. Read what the notes are supposed to look like. Perhaps food pairing will help you actually pick out those notes, which is always helpful. Now that you've decided what the flavour notes are in your whiskey, we're gonna talk about complementing flavours. An easy way to pair whiskey with food is to pick out what those flavour notes are and then try and eat things alongside with similar flavour profiles, so that when you eat them, you will taste them more in the whiskey, and also the flavours will be enhanced in the food too. So if you're trying something in a sherry cask or a bourbon, so something quite sweet, you might want to go for a food which is dried fruit. You might try figs, you might try raisins alongside. Maybe think about something like a cinnamon bun, something that will complement the flavours that are naturally in the whiskey already. If your whiskey is smoky, so let's say you're trying to food pair a Lafroig 10-year-old, for example, you might want to try something like a smoked cheese, maybe like a smoked Gouda or a smoked meat. There's plenty of like pastrami, things like that would go brilliantly with a Lafroig 10 or an Ardbeg, something along those lines. If you're trying to pair a whiskey that's particularly light or fresh, you could try pairing it with something like fish or seafood. Sushi, ceviche works well. Think like Glenlivet 12, something pretty like fresh and floral. If you pair it with ceviche, it's going to really enhance the fresh notes in the whiskey. Those whiskey notes will really complement the fish as well. If you're trying a whiskey, let's say a rye whiskey, think Whistle Pig or something like that, something along those lines where it's like a little bit spicy, you could try pair spicy food with it. So you could try Mexican food or curry, something like that. I feel like those flavors would really complement each other and enhance both the curry and the whiskey. I feel like that could be a really fun one to try. Maybe I have to do that. And think about the texture too. If you're trying something really smooth, an Irish whiskey, you could try something like smooth chocolate, pair it with like a creamy cheese or something like that. There are loads of things you could play with. The possibilities are really, really endless. The third step I'm going to give you is contrast. Now, we've already talked about complement. You can pick out a honey note in a whiskey and pair it with a honey food, but you can also pick a completely contrasting flavor, which actually will stand up to the opposing flavor, and actually they taste really good together. So think like sweet and salty like popcorn. It just works because the contrasts go together and they just create something magical. The same thing applies with whiskey. So let's say you're drinking a nice sweet bourbon, so say Maker's Mark. You could try and pair that with something smoky, barbecue food, let's say ribs. You could try pair those together. The flavors will really clash together, but actually they make something wonderful. Same goes with smoky. If you've got an Ardbeg bottle or, you know, a smoky or peaty whiskey, you could try pair that with something really sweet. So think desserts, chocolate, fruits, something rich, a mousse or something like that, or a sorbet, maybe an ice cream. Or what about a spicy rye whiskey, let's say a Bullet rye whiskey? You could go totally opposite end of the spectrum and pair that with something really creamy, like a creamy cheese or a yogurt, or, you know, something rich and buttery. That could go really nicely. Maybe that's another one for my list. Again, if you've got something sherried and sweet, or, you know, a sweet bourbon, you could try pairing that with something salty. So think crisps, nuts, pretzels, things like that. Maybe even olives. Olives could be a really good one. I'm curious about that actually. If you're trying a whiskey that's light and fruity, maybe like an Auchentoshan or a Glenlivet, you could try pair that with something really umami, something really savory. You could try it with sushi and wasabi or a Thai curry. That could work. Or what about a peated scotch with a really creamy seafoody pasta? So, you know, salmon and cream pasta, something like that. Ooh, that might be my dinner inspiration for tonight. I think the key is just to really experiment and to see what you like. You might not get it right the first time. The more you play with it, the more you'll find out what works for you. Right now, I'm gonna pair some Lafroig 25 with a trusty piece of chocolate. Slancha. It is so perfect. Have you ever food paired with whiskey before? Are there any particular combinations that you specifically enjoy? I would love to hear them. This is a two-way conversation. Definitely let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear if you do try this out, what you think, and if you find any combinations that work really well. If you are a fan of whiskey, make sure you subscribe to Whiskey Raiders and give this video a like if you enjoyed it, so that I know what content you like and what content you don't. I am definitely going to go off and enjoy the rest of my whiskey and my chocolate, but I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!